The views and opinions expressed in this program do not necessarily represent those of Natural Bridges Media or KSQD's staff, volunteers, or underwriters.
Hello and welcome to Talk of the Bay. I'm your host, Len B.A. And with me today is John Mulry. John Mulry is a local community builder, founder of the Future Urbanist Club, a local chapter of the national nonprofit Strong Towns, a creative strategist by trade, and a devotee of trickster gods. He originally began his college education training to be an Episcopal priest, but we'll find out what he's up to these days. John Mulry, welcome to Talk of the Bay.
Hi, Len. I'm excited to be on the radio.
And I'm excited to have you here. So I wanted to start, since you've gotten this local group going as a chapter of Strong Towns, I wonder if you could explain for our audience the basic thesis of what Strong Towns is about.
So Strong Towns is an urban planning group in its heart. We focus on things like safe and productive streets, sound housing, and various other things that have to do with urban planning. So bike lanes. I'm getting there right now. We're gonna get into this.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the things that struck me in reading about Strong Towns is, the founder is a former, public works engineer, right? And he had that experience of seeing the city invest a lot in infrastructure for new development and realized that ultimately that new development was financially unsustainable. And that was really interesting to see how that played out over time, and where he was able to compare like older patterns of development and the more like what we call suburban sprawl pattern of development in terms of the economics for operating a city. And that was amazing. For me, that was, I guess I kind of felt it intuitively, but I never understood the numbers behind it before.
You were an urban planner, I believe.
I was an urban planner way back in the 1980s. So, but yeah, I have a degree in planning, and I did that for a little while before I basically got fed up with the political aspect of it. So
you saw a lot of then what really brought him to it. So at first he was building everything. You're talking about Chuck, our founder, and he eventually started to realize that the return on investment was just terrible. Cities were destroying their budgets through infrastructure that they would never be able to afford long term. And we now call it the suburban development model. And it's what we have here even in Santa Cruz. This is a big issue here. We're not fixing our roads, not because we don't want to fix our roads. We can't afford to fix our roads. And it's only going to get worse because we don't think about return on investment. The person who owns everything in this county, all the businesses, the Sentinel across the street here, these are all owned by people who are factoring a return on investment. And we just don't do that at the government level. And that's wild.
Right. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And obviously there was a period of enormous national wealth and a lot of it invested into infrastructure in a way where they weren't really thinking ahead of like how much is it going to cost to keep this going for more than 50 years. And so, we're kind of in a bind. I had on this program quite a while ago now the Assistant Director of Public Works for Santa Cruz County, and he provided to me figures that showed their projections for what they call deferred maintenance. In other words, the work they know should be done on the county's roads and streets, and how much won't get done. And before the State Senate Bill 1 passed, which was several years back now, that provided additional gas taxes towards towards maintaining roads and streets and highways. Before that, he showed it was its upward sloping line of deferred maintenance rather. As years go on, there'd be more and more and more stuff that was deferred, so you'd get further and further behind. And then he showed with the added funding from SB1, it was still an upward sloping line. It just wasn't as steep. So it's, and, this is the county which has a lot more rural area. But, except for cities like San Francisco, which are extremely dense, from border to border, almost every city in the state is in the same position as the county is in terms of having a growing backlog of deferred maintenance.
And we have some particular problems here that other counties don't. Our county is actually the largest jurisdiction in county. So the largest population in county is the county population, the unincorporated, over 50% of our residents. That's very uncommon. That's just not how it normally is.
Right.
And if you look at county spending and other stuff right there, so one of the things I always think about to show just how bleak our monetary problems are is Santa Clara County spends about $10,000 per resident per year. Santa Cruz County spends about $400 per resident. The state average is somewhere in the $1,200 to $1,400. I'm not entirely sure. That's not where I specialize, but we are near the very bottom. So when we look out around us, we look at housing prices, we look at cost of living here. We think we live in a wealthy place, but we live in a place whose budgets are dying. Today, they just announced that Santa Cruz County will have the steepest decline in public school enrollment over the next couple of years, 21% out of any county in California.
Wow.
Yeah, that's terrifying.
That's an 21%. Decline.
So I started this organization to begin with, and I really
that means families with kids are just leaving the area.
So I got involved because I live in Capitola, and when I decided I wanted to live in Capitola with my wife 20 years ago, it was filled with children on bikes and people walking the streets, and now it's mostly beach houses and older residents, and our streets, our infrastructure is not prepared for that. You were talking about the gas tax, and even as you said it, SB1 was for building out our roads, but no, SB1 is actually supposed to build out our entire transportation system, and we just give all the money to cars. So our entire infrastructure in this county is always car first. It's not, should we have some bike lanes? Should we have sidewalks? There's a new roundabout. I forget where it is, but it's somewhere near the university. And one of our members sent us a picture of a guy on a wheelchair being pushed in the street in the roundabout because the sidewalk is maybe 6 feet wide and there's a giant utility telephone pole, or it was a street light, but right in the middle. So he couldn't even get his wheelchair at that. And that's a brand new roundabout. So while we're designing this isn't like recently we're designing this, we're still just blindly moving towards car transport. You have the widening project. So I think widening highways for buses is a great idea. If we put cameras on the front of the buses so we can have enforcement, most highway widening projects result in more traffic. There's study after study, because the more you push everyone towards driving, the more people will drive. If you make the bike lanes 6 inches of paint, like on SoCal, our brand new bike lane, I would never go down that curvy part of SoCal Ave right there on that curvy little paint bike lane.
I do ride it, but it's one of those where you always are kind of looking over your shoulder because you can't be confident.
No,
there's a bike lane that's kind of funny on SoCal Drive near Dominican Hospital.
Well,
if you're going westbound on SoCal Drive, you've got to cross not just the bridge over the freeway, but you've got to cross the on-ramp onto the freeway.
Terrifying. On-ramps are the worst.
It's, as a bicyclist, I grew up riding bike in LA, and I know pretty much a lot of tricks for staying safe. But I look at that over and over, and I think, how would I coach other people to do this in a safe way? And there really isn't a really great way to do it. There's less bad ways to do it, but there's not a great way to do it because it's inherently unsafe. People are speeding up to get onto the freeway right where bicycles might be crossing their path. And it's kind of dangerous, which, just to underline what you were talking about, the budget, what's weird at the federal level, a lot of transportation money comes from the federal government, but still to this day, the legislature, our Congress, has been earmarking 80% of the transportation funds going to automobile transportation, no matter what. And most of that goes to new construction. Very little of it goes to maintenance, which obviously is a more pressing need in most municipalities in the country. And organizations like Transportation for America have been pushing over and over and over again to change that so it's a fluid balance between public transit and bicycle infrastructure and so forth and automobile transportation. But so far they're sticking to that, which dates back to the 60s, by the way, this 80-20 split between automobile and everything else. And it's like, this is out of balance. Folks.
So many of our problems date back. So not to get into Proposition 13, just the one part of Proposition 13, at that time it was locked in how much of our property tax the county could get. We only get 13%. Some counties get 20% of their taxes back. So right there, we're already at a disadvantage. I lost my train of thought knowing that.
Yeah, but it has to do with, I think, partly the way land use is allocated.
It was also
and
just
special districts.
Yeah, it was just what it was at the time too, and like the law is not going to change. And with that in mind, so that's what I'm thinking. So one of our biggest problems is parking requirements. These date back to the 1960s when we thought we would need all this parking. The city of Capitola to this day, I believe, requires 2.5 parking spaces for every studio apartment you build in the city. Think about that. I mean, why would we want that much parking? And parking is the big one for me for so many reasons. Pavement causes the environment to heat up. It makes cities just less human spaced and welcoming to others. And it is the source of so many of our problems as far as return on investment. Parking is the worst investment. Cars don't buy things from stores. Cars,
but we're making so much space for them.
Well, I mean, we are, and they even pay very little. So, like in Capitola, this is where I live. This is why I know the numbers there so well. Our parking spaces make about $3,600 a year on average, which is nothing when you think about it. And the idea is, and chambers are always opposed to getting rid of parking, and cities say we can't get rid of it because if we don't have parking, people won't come to shop at our stores. It's not at all true. And in coastal cities in particular, in Santa Barbara, they closed State Street during COVID. And 80% of residents to this day support that closure. They've seen something like an 8-fold increase in sales tax from the State Street area since they closed it. And there's larger studies that show closing streets sometimes does go wrong for municipalities. That's why so many of them are afraid to do it. But in coastal communities like ours, city of Santa Cruz,
it was nice weather.
It always ends up being more money. In fact, the one study that people refer to all the time about why we can't close streets, that study specifies that coastal areas always benefit from closing their streets down. Because now people, they have to park in a parking lot and walk past all the businesses to get to the beach instead of parking right at the beach, going to the beach, and never coming back. We don't have hotels in Capitola, so these people are just parking and not spending any money, but we're paying for all this maintenance. And just parking in general for the environment. It's so many of our choices at some point have to be, do we care about the future? Do we care about having children in this county? Do we care about dealing with our environmental problems? I want growth like anyone else. Growth is essential to pay for services in our system. We have very little choice. We built a system that requires growth. But even if we hadn't built that economic system, there was always going to be more people. So we were always going to have to grow. And if we don't start planning now, it took us 60 years to get into the suburban development model. If we don't start making small changes now to get out of it, we never will. And we only pretend to. We pay lip service to this stuff. We don't actually fix what we need to.
Yeah. And if you're just joining us, my guest is John Mulry. He's a founder of the Future Urbanist Club, which is a local chapter of the national nonprofit Strong Towns. And we're talking about, well, so far, planning issues, but we've got miles to go. So, and John, you were talking about parking, and it reminded me for a while, I lived part-time in San Francisco because I was working there, and I was trying to avoid doing the drive every day. And interesting, the way San Francisco is set up, there simply is not enough parking for everybody to have a car. I mean, if you own a car in San Francisco and live there, unless you have a private garage, which most homes do not, you are always going to be, playing a game of trying to find, parking lottery, of finding a place, within a reasonable walking distance of where you live. And part of the effect of that is fewer people own cars and more people use transit. It's like, oh, I got a parking place on my block. I'm taking the streetcar for the next 15 weeks because I won't need the car until then. And a lot of people have just gone to, no car. I just rent a car when I need to take a trip. And, it's like you think about the same thing with induced demand. When we expand a highway, gradually more cars use it, then it's just as congested 2 or 3 years after you've built the expansion. It's the same thing with induced lack of parking, is like it creates a really strong incentive to find an alternative. And if you have alternatives, and that's key, then people start to use them. And that's what you really see that in the Bay Area more and more, where parking is restrained. But here in Santa Cruz County, we have among the highest pedestrian and bicyclist fatality rates in the state. And of course, it doesn't stop there. The dangers inherent in the automobile-dominated transportation system cost the lives of about 40,000 Americans every year. And we get our local share. So there's been a lot of lip service played to safety, but we don't really have very safe streets. So from a strong town's perspective, what do safe streets look like?
The safest street is a street designed for people shared by all forms of transit, multimodal transportation. Very hot word. People love using that word, but what does it mean? And it does require investments in things like public transit. We are very lucky in this county. We got a CEO of Metro, Michael Tree, who came in with a reformist character. And the buses get hyped a lot that he just got, the largest hydrogen bus fleet in the country, paid for with a grant. Fantastic. He's done a lot of other great stuff with the new phase rollout, making the routes more precise and more just better designed.
Yeah, faster headways.
Now, what I think he's done that is most important is in phase 2, transit will be fare free. And I use the word toll free instead. Because why are we making people pay for public transit when our roads and our car system is incredibly subsidized? The amount of money that we put into making the car system continually viable, we could take 2% of that funds every year and make all public transit in the entire nation, and this is the federal funds, absolutely free. So we wouldn't have to use state funds even if we just started using that 2%. And in a state like California, you'd see even more investment in that because obviously we have a perfect state for public transit because it's always nice out for the most part. Like, why not have bike lanes anywhere? We don't have to put winter tires on our bikes. Like, you don't even think about this stuff. Right. My poor friends in Chicago and New York.
When was the last time I rode a bike on ice?
No.
That's a long time ago.
I just learned about a cool thing. So when they did, with your street design idea and safety, so in places where it snows, they have these things called snack downs. And if you actually watch after a snowstorm, cars will naturally create the snack down. So they will extend the curb area. And I wish I could show you a picture of it, but basically instead of our slip lanes, which are how our curbs are designed, so cars can make turns very quickly around them, when there's snow, they don't turn like that because it's dangerous. And you naturally see the space the car should occupy, and it's across. It's not this entire slip lane
with the
system.
Rounded corners.
And now I learned of a new thing called neck downs, which are leafy neck downs. So in places that there are leaves on the ground, you actually see the same thing happen because the leaves get blown to the side of the road and the cars don't drive through it. And it brings us to our fundamental point. The only way to make streets safe from automobiles, our road violence epidemic kills far more people every year than our gun violence epidemic. If there was a plane crash that killed 40,000 people died in the airline industry every year, 40,000 customers, we would address that immediately. If 2 people get sick from lettuce, we will shut down the entire farm industry for that area and state until we figure out where this, disease is coming from. So we need to accept self-enforcing design. Self-enforcing design is where the cars don't really have a choice. And what brings cars to have no choice? Because people will drive as fast as the roads allow them. Enforcement, signage, all of this is a joke in urban planning. You know this. We all know that it does absolutely nothing.
Yeah. Just putting a lower speed limit on the
No,
sign does
nothing.
not make people slow down.
I mean, we can get into that in 1 second, too, because I have a lot to say about speeders. But we need our streets to have things like bollards, curb bulb outs, these very basic designs. Our streets don't even have curb cuts that are appropriate for handicap, for wheelchair use. Many of our curb cuts are just in the middle. They're not the whole curb. So you actually have to go out into the street in order to get there in many ways. And you get people tripping on the curbs that way too, but that's a whole different thing. So we need to make the streets safe in a way where cars feel like they could damage themselves, because that's what people actually care about. We're not bad humans. We genuinely care about our cars not getting hurt. That's something we don't.
And we try to fit where we think we can fit. And people's spatial sense of their vehicles varies from driver to driver. But if it's a known fact, if the lanes are narrower, people go slower.
Friction. So there's all these ways. So narrowing lanes is an easy thing to do. The lanes are only supposed to be 10 to 12 feet wide. Here, we have 14 to 15 feet is almost the standard here. Mm-hmm. And in many parts of our county, we have 20-foot lanes in some places. Think about all that wasted public land. So that's public land that could be used for all. Imagine it. Like pick your poison, whatever you're into.
Some of the complete street standards are actually recommending 9-foot wide lanes.
Yeah, I mean, that would be amazing. That's going to be hard with some of our giant trucks these days, which is another problem we have in the United States. Let's just go with the flow here. So they actually, in the United States, our trucks used to be about 65% bed, 35% cab. Now our trucks are 34% bed, 46% or 76% cab, or 66. I think my math was wrong. Yeah. But that is insane. That's insane. And they've raised the front of the trucks up. So they call it the fruck now in urban planning, where there's just a giant space in the front of your truck. And that's so they could raise it off the ground to make it higher. There's a bunch of sociological and other theories on why they did this with the trucks. And there's sound economic reasons as far as the U.S. marketplace. But this is where we really get to it. These same companies, so Toyota especially, they sell a $10,000 Hilux in South America, in Africa, in Asia. That's a normal car height. It has a long bed. It has the same towage as these giant trucks here, but it's a real car. It's designed to be used on streets by human beings. Our trucks here they're prestige pieces. They're show pieces for guys who can't buy Corvettes. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I get it. We deserve to buy Corvettes, but we can't afford them anymore. I can't drop $120,000 on a car, but I can drop $50,000 on a car, absurdly to say that out loud. In all these other countries, they're still selling work trucks, fantastic work trucks that look just like our trucks did in even 2010, 2011, like Rangers from that period. Right. I go around trying to find a Ford Ranger from 2011 everywhere I go. It costs more than it did when it came out. Yeah. And that's not just the market. There's a demand. Well, because people want cars that they can park in their driveways, that they're not going to run over their kids or hit their neighbors with. I would be terrified driving one of those trucks like this. Sometimes when I'm crossing the street at some of the more dangerous intersections in Capitola, I'm small, but I'm 5'8". The trucks can't see me if I'm right at their grill. I look over like they can maybe see the top of my head. That makes no sense.
There was an interesting video of a row of kids sitting in front of, like a brand new pickup truck. And they're sitting, they start just in front of the bumper and then they sit out. And it took, I believe, 12 kids before they were far enough away that the driver could see them, because the hood of the truck blocked that whole space. It was a blind spot. That whole space. 12 kids.
And I'll throw in on this too. It's just like guns, these big cars. Guns, your gun is most likely to be used on you or someone you love. Almost all guns deaths are gun deaths for people with guns that are owned by them or someone they know.
Yeah. Accidents, suicides.
Yeah, suicides is the big one, but it's all. And it's same thing with cars like this. So not only are you a danger to community, you are most likely to run over someone you love in your own driveway, in your own garage, because you literally can't see. It's really hard, some of these things on me, because it's just so obviously a bad idea.
And it's, there's the whole piece about individual ownership. And I'll say, I'll start by conceding, if you're a contractor, if you're a rancher, you need a truck. you have to have your own car. You can't be calling Uber to use an Uber truck or something. You need it. But for 90% of the people who live in urban environments, we could get by just fine if there were, essentially public vehicles, like shared vehicles, and if we rented a car for those long rural trips, right? That would work great and would require far fewer cars to be manufactured and sold. The key being here, there's an enormous amount of profit in this system that we've built, for building and selling cars to, so there's 2.2 cars per household in California. But it certainly isn't sustainable in a post-carbon world for us. I'm not talking about even driving the vehicles, to manufacture those vehicles and provide the infrastructure for them, including the storage space, which brings us back to parking. It's not sustainable to do that for everybody. That doesn't mean we can't have access to cars. It just means it doesn't make sense for everybody to own their own.
And we've locked ourselves into the system, so it's a slow change by all means, but we need to start now. We need to start making these changes now. And we can't demand the car companies sell us the same trucks they do. I mean, our regulatory or politicians could, but they won't. So we're not going to get those. We're stuck with these big trucks in America. It is what it is. But we can get this message out there that, you don't need this big truck, and that this big truck isn't actually good for your community, which, let's take this into speeding. So I always love to say this, as you know, you've met with me a couple times at some Strong Towns meetings. Who are the most dangerous people in our community as far as statistically? Who is most likely to kill one of their neighbors? Who's most likely to hurt themselves or others? If you throw age into it, someone like me in a car. So it's speeders, by the way. Nobody.
There's
people
spoiler.
Miss that. It's people who speed, and I speed. We all speed. I drive on the highway now, and I don't go above 50. And the anger, I mean, you're a biker, so you get way more anger at you, but the anger, people pass me on the left, they speed up as they're passing me, honking their horn, like, what? I get it, I'm going 50. You don't like it, but that's how fast I feel like driving right here. Mm-hmm. And then you go to your communities, residential streets in Europe, even in South America, it's 18 miles per hour. That's what city streets should be. Ours are all 25. So even there, we're decades behind other countries. And I'm not talking about wealthy Europe. Everyone says, well, if you love Europe so much, move to Europe. Yeah, I mean, I could move to Europe, so, don't tempt me too much. But I have the economics to do that. But I don't want to move to Europe. This is my place. I love where I live. And I don't just mean Santa Cruz. I love the United States of America. My politics make me a deeply patriotic human. And I want to fix here. And the first step in that is accepting these obvious problems. And the economics, too. Right. For me, it's always just economics, man. I do not understand how we don't get we're dying. This is a cemetery. This isn't a robust, resilient place that's rolling with the punches. We are losing every battle. We're losing our environmental battles. We're losing our health battles. We're losing our demographic battles, our economic battles, our city budget battles. We're losing everywhere you look in this county, and not every county, even in California, has this happening. We are rare in that we are doing so badly that we are now going to have the steepest decline in education enrollment. We are the worst place to be a renter in the country. Yeah. How are we worse than San Francisco? I mean, come on, man.
That's hard to believe.
That is sometimes when I think about that, I'm like, they did the math wrong. There's no way they did that math right, but they didn't. It's correct.
Well,
it's real.
Average income versus average rent.
And they say this year is going to be worse for us too.
I believe it.
I've heard this year we are going to drop. We're going to be even more in first place or worst place, however you want to put that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I want to get into talking about housing in the second half of the show.
Love it.
Boy, we've got plenty of topics to cover, but we're going to take a really short break, and we'll be right back with more conversation with John Mulry right after this. Don't touch that dial. And if you're just tuning in to Talk of the Bay here at KSQD, I'm your host, Len B.A., and my guest is John Mulry. He's a local community builder, founder of the Future Urbanist Club, a local chapter of the national nonprofit Strong Towns. He's a creative strategist by trade, a devotee of trickster gods, which is interesting because he originally began his college education training to be an Episcopal priest. But we have lots to cover. We were talking about designing streets to keep speed down. And one thing I found in research is that they found that if a street has a tree canopy, you take two streets that are identical in every other respect, same, typical like number of trips per hour at peak times and street width and all that. The street with a tree canopy versus the street without, people will drive slower on the street with a street canopy. So, there's lots of benefits beyond that for tree plantings and other vegetation in urban areas, including making walking more attractive, for one thing, reducing the heat island effect, which is what happens when heat builds up as the sunlight hits pavement, reducing runoff, and then, of course, slowing traffic. And I wondered if you could share some particulars about the benefits of plants in public urban spaces.
So we're talking about perceived and actual friction here. Which is what lane narrowing does. It gives you that. It makes you more afraid you're going to hit something, so you drive slower and more in control. Trees actually have the same effect. It's one of those interesting facts that we've learned, that just having trees, and it's not just trees, cactuses, tiny little 1 foot wide medians with succulents in it, just like tiny little succulents,
right.
That does it as well. And in Santa Cruz, there's a great example of this. I think it's even you who brought up the negative aspect of this to me. Is it Walnut Street or Laurel that has one of them has the trees and one right next to it has no trees?
Yeah, Lincoln Street has hardly any streets and trees, and Walnut has a tree canopy in that block between Center and Chestnut.
So Walnut is, I've never actually been there in person, but I've seen pictures of it.
Really?
Yeah, my life, I don't really drive,
right.
And I don't bike here because it's too dangerous, and
Capitola.
I don't bike here because it's too dangerous. I have small kids. It's irresponsible of me, in my opinion, to do that, and I am not saying that other parents who bike here, like, we deserve to bike with our children here. This is absurd. I'm just too anxious about it. So I quit biking when I moved here. End of story. But so we have then Walnut and Lincoln there. Lincoln, people drive significantly faster. It's a less pleasant experience. And it's just, it's wrong in all the ways. Other things that help with friction are even wider sidewalks, we figured out. So just having a wider sidewalk. Now, Santa Cruz is known, even in the Bay Area, for having excessively narrow sidewalks. I don't entirely know why. I've never had it explained to me. But our sidewalks on average are about 2 feet shorter than the other counties around us. They're just like average sidewalks in urban environments. That's a huge difference. A huge difference. Our sidewalks don't actually meet the California code in most places for two-way pedestrian traffic.
That's telling.
And
it's, I've, spent some time in Watsonville, and there are neighborhoods in Watsonville where there are no sidewalks.
Yep.
And it's like, and these are not neighborhoods that have no residential areas. They're there might not be any in that immediate frontage, but right around the corner, it's all residential, and there's no sidewalks. And it's like, this is wrong.
You want to make it crazier. So I live on Depot Hill in Capitola. Depot Hill has a fantastic cliffside path up there on the hill. So we have tourists all day. And once we have this new rail or new trail, we will have even more tourists up there. But people walk up the stairs or they walk up into Depot Hill. They walk along this path. Great. And then they come down on these streets that have cars parked on both sides that are very less than well maintained, and no sidewalks. And it goes even farther. We actually have it in the Capitola general plan or in the city regulation somewhere. Someone got it written into the plan that there will never be sidewalks on Depot Hill.
Wow.
Why? Why? I get not wanting them now. Maybe we can't afford them, but why actually build it into the future infrastructure that we never want sidewalks on Depot Hill? That's
interesting.
Yeah, and it's so very wealthy neighborhood, one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in the county, and there is some of it where the locals up there don't actually want sidewalks, but that is changing as our locals age, become older. And
Well,
they
and
understand.
it very, I mean, because I'm familiar with that neighborhood, and there are some streets that are quite narrow. That's the entire right of way of the
Very
individual
narrow.
street, like the I'll call them the cross streets.
So it's
that
Central,
are
Oakland, Hollister,
perpendicular
Sacramento.
to the shore.
So if you have cars parked on both sides, which there are there, they become one-way streets. So all day in front of my house, because I'm on a corner, I watch cars stop right in front of my house. And I used to say, wait, is this person like coming to park at my house and talk to me? Maybe they're seeing no, they're just waiting for another car to come all the way down the street and pass the two parked cars so that they can do it.
Right.
And that gets us back to parking. And I mean, it's just a circle where we have to decide one day, do we want our cities to be for people, or do we want our cities to be for cars? And
yeah,
we've chosen cars,
it's
guys.
interesting what you see, and there's a lot of, particularly you see this in Europe, but I think there's actually a handful of areas in the United States, mostly historical neighborhoods or small towns, where there are neighborhoods where the only vehicles that have access are essentially delivery vehicles, and the rest, the street otherwise, is a pedestrian street. And, if you're there at 5 o'clock in the morning, expect to see some vehicle traffic because they're doing all their deliveries then. But the rest of the time, everybody just kind of fills the street. If there's a lot of people out, it's a throng. And, and I've watched this over and over, and it's very pleasant. It makes it fun to walk around. And you think, well, how often do you need to move your car? Most of the time it's sitting still. So, yeah.
Great stuff right there. So Salt Lake City is actually trying to build these things called linear parks, which you see in South America, Europe, and China. I don't want to get into China, but what China has done with their rail system is incredible. I recommend everyone look into it. 20 years ago, they basically didn't have a rail system. Now they have world-class high-speed rail. They can send people from New York to Texas in like 2 hours. Can you imagine if we had
distance,
right? Can you imagine if we had that here? Now, what you were saying though about walkable neighborhoods. So strong towns, one of our big things, and just modern urbanism is walkability. What creates walkability? Getting rid of R1 zoning, couple other things, but there are places in America who have done this. So they've made themselves entirely walkable. Yeah. You probably actually attended one. I attended one. It's colleges. Colleges have created wholly walkable communities, and many people, college is the best time of their life. And obviously, like, you don't have a job, a lot of people in college, and you're leaving your parents' home. There's a lot of things to make it the best time in your life, but I genuinely believe in my heart, it's just that walkability. It's being able to wake up, know you can go hang with your friends in the plaza, know you can walk to a store right off campus and then walk right back on, not having to take a car. And what it builds is community. So you will hear everywhere you go about how, especially in the older generations, young people don't care about community anymore. That's outrageous. We need community more than everyone. We don't have the ability to fail up. If I fail economically, I'm not going to get bailed out. We don't have that wealth anymore. So I really want community, and walkability creates the ability to interact with people unplanned. And that's the key. So when we talk about how we never see our friends anymore, that's because we have to set up a time. Then we have to drive to see our friends. I have friends who live in areas where they'll be like, well, I'm going to go take a walk. I got to go drive there. Let me repeat that because I didn't say it great. People have to drive to go take a walk. Like, how is that not obviously a design fail in our systems? Like, how would you really want to live someplace where you have to drive to go take a walk? And yet most of us do, even in this county. And there are places where the landscape makes this harder. But not here. The city of Santa Cruz is not one of those places. Capitola, Watsonville, most of our county is not one of those places. We could have beautiful walkability. And it starts with things like plazas, Abbott Square. One of Strongtown's big local dreams is to shut Cooper Street down permanently, like they do for that dance event.
Yeah, and events where it's closed.
You probably remember this too, but it's always but we want it closed forever. Forever closed. And there was something called like the Cooper House years and years ago in that area.
Yeah.
And
because that's Cooper Street.
Right.
And there was it was the former county courthouse that had been converted to essentially a retail complex with restaurants and stores. And that building was badly damaged in the 1989 earthquake and is no longer with us. And many people who were around at the time will say, oh, they didn't really have to destroy it. I don't really know. But it was destroyed and replaced with another building that doesn't have the public space around it that the Cooper House had.
So it's lacking the community features that we used to build in. So Cooper House was a place, everyone who talks to me about it, the nostalgia drips from them when they talk about it. You know, oh, I listened to this band there. Like they're telling me stories they haven't thought about in 40 years. Most of the meetings I go to, I'm the youngest person there by like 2 decades, which is a whole nother demographic problem with civics in our county. But when these people talk to me about Cooper Street, I see it. I see them, and that doesn't exist anymore. And it's because we've stopped building it into our projects, and we don't have to. Our local politicians have pretty profound regulatory powers to make changes like this. I mean, many of the debates we're actually having in this county now, some of the big ones are like building heights and stuff. Those are more complex, but many of them are just like, should we have bike lanes? Should there be benches at our bus stops? These should not be debates, guys. There should be benches at the bus stops. There should be bike lanes. Any developer who wants to develop in our county should be required to build out the public infrastructure that we are going to maintain for them, like they used to in the 60s, 70s, 80s, at the beginning of this great suburban experiment and car-centric experiment. They were still remembering the old days, so that was included. But as we moved more and more and more, we just kept forgetting. Just like the truck's beds got smaller and smaller and more useless and more useless, our urban planning has gotten more car-centric and more car-centric. And when our planners plan stuff, and this is what they're trained for to do in school, they are taught to prioritize car speed over everything, not even flow. So there's this complicated formula that shows you what makes traffic, and it's like flow, speed, and something else. I'm not good at the policy and all that stuff. I was an organizer.
Well, the state of California, to give it credit, has now actually officially changed that policy that they're supposed to now look at vehicle miles traveled instead.
We'll see.
But we have a situation right now where somebody was dismissed from their job at the state transportation agency because she was blowing the whistle on the fact that they were approving projects that didn't meet the supposed new criteria.
Well, that was even worse, too, is my understanding, that not only did they not factor that in, they actually tried to pretend they were doing that, and then the whole point was to Trojan horse a highway lane widening in. And that's why, I mean, they actually, with that project, so sad story, she got fired, but interesting story, road projects like this never get stopped. No one ever stops them anywhere. They never get stopped. Going back to Robert Moses in the day when he basically brought this upon the Northeast, but that project actually did get stopped because it was a clear violation of California law. Other things I'm excited for that California does well on street stuff. So we just passed AB 413. It's daylighting. Daylighting is where you keep space between you keep the parking space between the crosswalk and the curb open. So you don't have parking right in front of a crosswalk, essentially. And it's 15 or 20 feet is the recommended, depending on the situation here. This will save thousands of lives because, again, we have these big trucks parked, or we have people that are looking.
You can't see around the parked vehicle to see who's entering this crosswalk.
Don't even blame the cars. Our crosswalks are so long. So I look at everything for me comes back to the village of Capitola because that's where I'm walking all the time. That is a perfect area to have curb bulb outs everywhere, narrow or short crosswalks.
Right.
It's like it's literally a space made for it, and we have
because with the bulb outs, you're making the distance the pedestrian has to travel shorter.
Exactly,
which makes it quicker for one thing, less exposure. Plus, the bulb out itself creates again that perceived space constriction, which slows people down. And there's the safety designed right in. Again, you don't need a 20 mile per hour speed limit sign to achieve it. You just make it so no sane person is going to drive faster than 20 in that particular spot.
Self-enforcing design. If you want to get it really clever, you put just a bollard on each side of that bulb out. Now the cars are really going to slow down because they know they can't just go over that curb. There's a bollard right there, and we will drive safer because no one's bad here. We're driving as the road was designed to drive
and
on it.
People are often stressed. I mean, I commuted over the hill from Santa Cruz for 13 years, and I know when you've had that long drive, you've been fighting traffic, and you're trying to get home, particularly at the end of the day, you might be more tired, and people are kind of stressed out, and they're feeling like, get me there, get me there. You know, sometimes our behavior is not at its best, and it's understandable. You know, there's been psychological studies now of what happens with people in cars. We are evolved to communicate through body language, humans. We communicate through body language a lot more than we're even conscious of. And you don't get any body language communication from car to car. I mean, even if somebody flips you off, you often can't see it through the tinted glass. So, and that's not the kind of body language I'm talking about.
We do have horns. That's the best we can do. And that's actually just jarring too. Horns don't actually really work well. Loud noises, we are not actually known to react well to loud noises that we unexpected. That's not our gift as humans.
It's a stress increaser. Yeah.
That's a rough commute. 17's a beast.
Yeah, it was an interesting experience.
This takes us back to the car-centric model there, though. Like, the suburban development model is unsustainable in all ways, and it's making us unhappy. Like, why are we just doubling down and tripling down on it and saying, well, we have no other choice?
Yeah, well, it's like, you know, we're trying to shift people who've been in the professions for designing for this stuff for, in many cases, decades. And, you know, they might be getting close to retirement or not. But to try to get them to change their view of how it should be done is not always that easy, regardless of what policies have actually been written.
I would highlight right here, though, City of Watsonville, they are revitalizing their downtown by turning that Strode, which is a street that isn't a street or a road. Mm-hmm. It's a Strong Towns word. I won't explain it because I'm bad at that. But they're going to turn that from 4 lanes to 2 lanes. People will be very angry for a little bit. And then when they see how much nicer it is there, they'll start to like it more. But what will really cement that is the city will start making more money. It'll start to be able to invest. Outside investors will want to invest in a community like this. Because if you're an outside investor, why would you invest in a place that's all road and that isn't very welcoming to people? If there's a place right down the road that's very welcoming to people, is going to keep paying you more and more.
And the city of Lancaster in Southern California did an amazing job of completely redesigning their main street, where it was just that. It was like this giant high-speed boulevard, and now it's this wonderful little quiet zone where, I mean, there are traffic lanes. You can drive there.
You can drive through it.
And there's parking.
You can
drive
more parking
fast than there used to be.
No, you can drive fast through it still. And Lancaster, too, had a very less than great reputation, you know, sort of like not the place you wanted to go unless you had to. They have had over $180 million in investment since they did that project. More than was put into the city for the last 30 years.
Wow.
And this is private money. This isn't public money, obviously. This is private money. Think about that.
And developing properties there.
Can imagine if the city of Santa Cruz suddenly had $180 million in private investment here, not to build hotels, to build things that we actually want. Not that I'm against hotels either, guys. I'm more into housing. It is what it is.
And on to housing. I mean, we're already getting close to the end of the show. But
I can always come back.
But yeah, you can. You know, right now, local municipalities are statewide are dealing with allocations of new housing that the state has supposedly determined is each community's fair share. Our zoning and general plans are supposed to be changed if necessary to accommodate those additional units. The city of Santa Cruz is contemplating a rezoning of the entire neighborhood between Laurel Street and Beach Hill to accommodate the vast majority of those housing unit additions. Although, of course, such new development could go anywhere, technically, where the zoning will accommodate more units. And apparently existing zoning could already allow more than twice as many new dwelling units as our state allocation is. So, but in any case, I guess somebody had a vision that if we could concentrate a whole bunch of development there on south of Laurel, we'd get a whole bunch of new housing there that would help meet this requirement.
Not to interrupt you, but they've changed it to hotels. In November, the Santa Cruz City Council changed the priority from housing to hotels, and I think even approved a large hotel on a parcel that was supposed to be housing. I think that's already happened, in fact.
Well, I know there's one approved on Front Street, but that's above Laurel.
Yeah,
maybe there are others, and I'm definitely not keeping up.
This isn't my thing
on a
either,
project
to be
by
honest.
project basis. Although, by the way, anybody who wants to know project by project, you can actually go to look up Santa Cruz City Planning, and they have do a good job of showing you what's up for approval, projects that are up for approval and recently approved.
And I'm not a
If
member of
you want
this.
to find out, it's not hard to do.
And I'm not a member of this organization, but Santa Cruz YIMBY, if you want to know about this stuff, they are really on top of informing the public about the projects that are going on. So
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you, John, what you make of these various proposals out there to accommodate higher density, and do you think any of it will have a positive impact on affordability?
Well, this brings us all the way back to the suburban development versus the traditional development model. So in traditional development, you build incrementally wherever people want to build, essentially. So you build everywhere, but you never build bigger than you need to, and you don't see these grandiose urban renewal Robert Moses-esque projects that we see right now. And the reason we see these projects in the United States is because let me backtrack a little. So the only two choices are to build a little bit everywhere or a lot in a single spot. And in the United States, we're very constrained by two things. R1 zoning, which is just a racist zoning policy. You can look into it. It doesn't exist in the rest of the world. It is very unique to us and a little bit Canada, North America, but it's a terrible thing economically in all ways. So we have R1 zoning, which means you can only build residential in certain areas. And this is most of our county is R1 zoned. So I can't start a dentist practice like my dentist in my hometown, which doesn't have R1 zoning or has limited R1 zoning. He had a dental practice in his house. You could start a small corner store in your neighborhood. Then people can walk to the corner store and they don't have to drive. Right. If they're driving less, we need less parking. So we are constrained by R1 zoning. The other thing that constrains us is the parking requirements. If we just got rid of parking requirements, you would not see these skyscrapers everywhere because developers could build smaller and still be profitable. There's different numbers for parking.
It costs to build a parking
So there's
space.
different numbers for parking, and people will throw numbers at you. But there are certainly builds in California where each parking space has cost the developer close to $100,000. I mean, think about. So they have to build taller and taller. I started Strong Towns. I was actually a member of Santa Cruz YIMBY, and I disagreed with them on the belief that the solution to our problems was luxury high-rises everywhere. I still stand behind that. This is not Strong Towns' view. This is my personal view. I don't think rezoning all of Laurel for 12-foot or 12-story skyscrapers and now mostly hotel-oriented ones is the solution to our problems. I don't think that's the best idea. I think the solution to our problems is getting rid of parking requirements, which the city of Austin just did. If the city of Austin can get rid of parking requirements, okay, this is Texas. If they can pull this off, we can do it. And recently, in the last 2 years alone, the number of cities who have gotten rid of parking requirements, and all you do is you change the word required to recommended. And it solves all of your problems because most developers will still build parking because they know people want it. Why have 2.5 units for every studio when the builder can make a sane choice for the market? Right. And build the amount of spaces that the market wants. Why are we over-regulating everything? We can get into how this is where my conservatism comes out. I really don't understand all the regulations that make most of our problems are not people want to live here. We live in a place where people want to live. It's not developers don't want to develop here. People would love to develop here. We don't even let people build family homes here. How hard it is to build a family home.
To do an ADU in the city of Santa Cruz is
absurd.
You're talking, $500,000 to build a studio. And including the permit costs.
And they make you they really come back. You have to go back to the planning commission time and time again, especially if you need an exemption or a variance. It's very time consuming. And, most of us all work these days. People my age, we all
where
work.
They've done the statistics, like Los Angeles, for example, they found that there was tons of available, quote, housing, but it was all in the high high-end housing that was available. Whereas, where they showed there were 90, I forget the exact figure, it was 90-some thousand vacant units up for rent. And there were 60,000 people living on the street. The problem wasn't lack of housing units. The problem was the lack of the right kind of housing units that people can actually afford. And that's kind of, where this idea of just for building's sake, like, oh, well, the market will take care of it. Well, the market clearly doesn't take care of it because we've been letting it try for several decades now, and it's not cutting it.
And there's certainly places. There's a great Swedish study people love to cite that show the more housing you build, the better the housing situation gets for people lower down the housing musical chairs theory. And I do believe in that in many, many places. I think there are most municipalities in the United States that would actually work. You can build all the luxury housing you want. New York City even, this will work there. A small coastal California community on the Central Coast like this, just over the hill from the largest concentration of wealth in human history, you're never going to solve your problems here by just building luxury high-rises. The other landlords will just up their rates too. We need regulatory policies that address our housing crisis sanely. And for me, that would be making more areas not be R1 zoning. And just the parking. I mean, that I cannot stress enough. If anyone is actually listening to me and not just Len, if we just got rid of parking requirements, so many of our problems would start to disappear and we wouldn't even have to do anything else. We wouldn't have to have these fights over Measure D and the rail trail and Measure M. Just getting rid of parking requirements alone would spur development. It would spur community. It would spur building for multimodal transportation and transit. It would solve literally all of our problems. And if we ever do it and we're wrong, I'll leave the county, and a lot of the local politicians, I think, would be excited to learn that. So,
well, we are virtually out of time. Yeah. John Mulry, it's been a real pleasure having you on the show. And is there anything you want to tell listeners about how to follow up on work you're doing at this point in time? You've got 30 seconds.
Sure. So check out our Instagram, SC Strongtowns. And we have a meeting next week, our January general meeting at Abbott Square at 6 p.m. on Wednesday, January 10th. And there will be city councilors there, or city council candidates attending. So it'll be real fun.
Great. Well, John Mulry, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you for joining me here.